All right, we are back with episode 2 of the 2023 recap of the NHL season. We are now focusing on the Atlantic Division. Some good teams, some not, some impressive teams, some not. We will start this with the Boston Bruins, and we'll have Eric start this one off before we have my input. And Eric, what are your thoughts?
Boston, this is a team that set records in the 2022-23 season. They won the most games in NHL history in a single season. That's very impressive. They won the President's Trophy, obviously. And this is a team, again, we saw David Pastrnak take a huge step forward, pacing the team with 113 points, 61 goals. He had a few hat tricks on the season, 2 hat tricks or 3 hat tricks, I don't remember. Pastrnak took that huge step forward. They saw him do that huge extension during the season. But after him, there were some question marks at times. The defense was strong, but it had its issues at times. So we'll see what happens with them. They really stepped up. Marchand really took a step forward, or continued to do what he could do, especially when he came back from his injury in the beginning of the year. Bergeron played about as well as you could expect at this point in time. So Boston's definitely a talented team. The big disappointment for Boston was the playoffs. Congratulations, you won the President's Trophy, but guess what? If you lose in the first round of the playoffs, no one's going to remember you for winning the President's Trophy. Everyone's going to say, oh, good job. Why didn't you win the Stanley Cup? And why weren't you the final team left? So disappointing end to a very strong season. If I'm a Boston fan, I'm excited for the future. How do you feel with your Boston Bruins shirt on?
Oh, slightly disappointed, but at the same time, you can't do it all in one season. Like you said, the historical aspects, most games won, great. President's Trophy, great. The dream would be they could go all the way, win the Cup with this whole historic season, but obviously it just doesn't happen all the time. Getting knocked out in the first round to the Florida Panthers, which we'll get to later in this video, it was kind of embarrassing. It's not something you'd expect. I saw the matchup and I was like, oh, it'll be done in 4 or 5 games, and it went all the way. So it's disappointment for me. The recap on the overall season was great, but the postseason was kind of an upset, and I was annoyed. I know plenty of friends and family members that were kind of pissed off because they had to have potential at least to get to the Eastern Conference Final, if not all the way to the Cup. So those are my thoughts on Boston. Now let's go to Western New York and the Buffalo Sabres. I'll go first here. Buffalo Sabres are getting there. That's all I can really say. Young players, Casey Middlestat, for example, as Eric and I know, have seen in his first point game back in, 2016, 2017 or something? 2018, we saw him get his first point in an NHL hockey game when they played the Detroit, even though they ended up losing like 6-2, but not a big deal. But young players like him are what's gonna revolve Buffalo around. They're kind of the younger New Jersey Devils if you compare them to the Metro. They're getting there. Do I think they'll make the playoffs going forward next season? Honestly, probably not. The team is getting better though over time with the acquisition of players, goalie, coaches. I didn't like back before a couple seasons ago when they had that soccer coach. I don't know why they even thought about bringing some guy over from England to coach a hockey team that was familiar with soccer. It's ridiculous. But to recap this past season, it was decent because they weren't terribly out of the playoffs, but there's definitely room for improvement on offense, defense, and goalie side. What about you?
Offensively, this team was actually the 3rd highest goal scoring team. So offensively, they don't need to really improve much. They can stay where they are. But that's also in part because Tage Thompson took a gigantic leap forward. Jeff Skinner doesn't look like the bust he did a year ago, 2 years ago. Rasmus Dahlin took a huge step forward defensively as well. So Casey Middlestat, who we saw in his debut game, just inconsistent, but he looked pretty good when he was producing. So, Buffalo, an underrated thing for Buffalo entering the 2023-24 campaign is that the vast majority of their core that they had this past year will be staying with them. This is a team that I can see being sneaky, but comparing them to the New Jersey Devils, that was a good comparison. I agree with that 100%. They're not there yet, but they have the pieces. They're going to start. One or two good moves will help them out. And yes, I don't understand why they hired a soccer coach. That never made sense to me.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, sum it up, needs improvement. They're getting there, but we'll see when it comes. So now going on to Detroit Red Wings, or as they're sort of known as the Dead Wings right now, still kind of dead. They're looking for that playoff appearance still, and it's been quite a few seasons now. So where the heck are they going to make it? This past season, they started off the season actually pretty hot, and then they ended up dropping off around Christmas time and never were able to recover themselves. So it's hard. I mean, obviously through the season they ended up getting rid of Bertuzzi, sending him to Boston. So surprisingly, I don't know why. I would have thought they would have kept on to him, because him and Moritz Seider and Dylan Larkin and stuff were kind of a decent duo there in terms of getting the team more well-rounded, according to Yzerman's plans. But it just didn't work out, and they kind of want to move things around more. So, you know, they're dipping their feet in the water. I still think it's going to be a few more seasons until they make the playoffs, but, you know, hopefully they'll make the right strides in the offseason with the free agency.
This is a team that has a lot of veterans, a lot of older players, but Yzerman's doing a good job getting players he wants. Dylan Larkin, definitely face of this franchise, maybe a bit of a disappointment thus far in his career, still a great player. Outside of him, they also traded away Filip Hronek. That was probably the bigger trade deadline move that they made rather than Bertuzzi, just because he still had a couple years of contract. He, of course, would get hurt in Vancouver, but regardless, this is a team that you pretty much summed it up pretty nicely. This is a team that has some potential, but they still need to make a good amount of moves to do really anything.
All right, so going on, we'll have Eric start this team off. So, the underdog, Florida Panthers. Eric, what are your thoughts on their 2023 season?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in the 22 season, this team won the President's Trophy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, we knew that the Panthers had the potential, but they just did not look good. There were times where the team was falling apart. We saw their coach, Maurice, yelling at the team at times. So, I mean, they made a trade acquisition prior to the season, getting Matthew Tkachuk. They went out. They still kept a lot of their key players. Of course, Barkov's still there, arguably the most underrated superstar in the league. But the problem for them was that they were so inconsistent this year that we saw them barely make the playoffs as the last team, wildcard 2 in the East, barely beating Pittsburgh for that spot. But, I mean, Tkachuk did about what you expected, maybe even better than expected. Barkov was a little bit of a disappointment. Everyone else, Verhaeghe was actually pretty good as well. But everyone outside of him, Tkachuk, and you can make a case for Sam Reinhart, was very inconsistent. So that's the issue with Florida. But once they got into the postseason, we all know what they did. They pulled off the upset, beating the juggernaut Boston Bruins. They pulled off another little bit of an upset when they beat the other two teams that they beat. Of course, Toronto. I mean, Toronto actually got past the first round for the first time in who knows how long. We'll get to them in a minute. And then when they knocked out the Carolina Hurricanes, I was rooting for them against Vegas for sure, but unfortunately they fell. Still, for a team like Florida to make it to the Stanley Cup final this year, not expected. I would have expected this last year, not this year. The pieces are there, but the real question for them is their goaltending issues. I mean, Bobrovsky's great and all, but it's a shame that you have Spencer Knight just kind of has fallen off a cliff at this point. How do you feel about them?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the whole season was definitely one to applaud. Like you said, last year they won the President's Trophy. I would have thought they would have gone all the way and won it last year. That didn't happen. This year, the minimum I was expecting was them to at least make the playoffs. And, you know, they actually got in by the skin of their teeth, somehow pulled the upset against Boston, and then went on to go all the way to the final against Vegas. And, of course, Vegas, losing in 2018 to the Capitals, did not want to get lost again or beaten again. So, you know, they ended up winning. But still a very impressive and proud season for the Florida Panthers. Will that drive up ticket fans? Probably not. This is the Florida Panthers, people. This is America's basement. So, we'll get into the other videos about their roasting. But anyways, to sum it up quickly, yeah, definitely an impressive season. And obviously, if they would have won the Cup, that would have been one of those like dream seasons for Paul Maurice and stuff, and the team in general, with all the moves they made in the last season. So, going on to the Montreal Canadiens. We'll start with you, Eric, on this one.
Allez, Montreal. Allez. Montreal Canadiens had a disappointing season. Unfortunately, the team, I mean, will Carey Price ever return, or is he going to retire? I think at this point, Carey Price is done, which is a huge shame. Carey Price, I mean, almost single-handedly carried this team to the Stanley Cup a couple years ago, but it's sad. Regardless, I mean, outside of Nick Suzuki, nobody really did anything. Kirby Dach was good, but he wasn't worth what they gave up for him. Cole Caulfield was good, but again, didn't really play all that well when healthy. So, I mean, Montreal just didn't do all that much. Bit of a disappointment. Just disappointing season for them. They've been, ever since their surprise Stanley Cup appearance in the shortened 21 campaign, they've just been a dumpster fire.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree. I mean, this is one of the teams I don't have a lot to say on at all. Like you said, Nick Suzuki is one of their good players, but there's a ton of work they have to do. Not just in terms of getting more players, but, you know, everybody had their hopes up when they hired Martin St. Louis, and things just don't seem to be working out so far. And I think if they don't work out next season, I mean, to just make the playoffs or something, or get some type of, you know, more winning record. I don't know what Louis' future is going to look like, but just a disappointing season overall, which is no different from our next team, which happens to be the Ottawa Senators. Man, where do we start with the Senators? This is another team I don't have a lot to say about because it's disappointing. They have better players, I think, I would say, than Montreal for sure, but they just can't fire on all their cylinders. And, you know, I don't know if they seem like they're distracted with the whole ownership and selling of the team and them just not playing well. It's just, you know, struggling with attendance, and there's just a number of stuff with Ottawa that just isn't adding up right now. And if they don't make moves, it's just going to continue to go downhill. What about you?
Spot on. I mean, they got the lesser Kachuk brother. Of course, we just talked about Matthew. Now we have Brady. They signed Claude Giroux in the offseason. They traded for Alex DeBrincat, but, I mean, we're seeing what's happening right now with this team. The team just massively disappointing. They were expected to be they were expected to be where New Jersey was. They were expected to be the young team that took a step forward. They failed to do so. Big time disappointment. The pieces are there for them to really dominate in the future, but yeah, I agree with you. I think the rumors, the whole ownership questions is really what's hurting them right now. But it is what it is. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to start off with Tampa Bay here.
Go ahead.
Now, the Tampa Bay Lightning, of course, this is a team that's made 3 consecutive Stanley Cup Finals, of course, winning 2 of them. So there are a lot of expectations for Tampa Bay entering the year, but we kind of saw what was expected. When you make 3 consecutive Stanley Cups, you're going to be in a bad situation with your salary cap, with your players. You're putting at minimum 16 extra games on those players each year. And that's assuming you sweep all your series. There's so much wear and tear on these guys, and it finally caught up to them. You know, this is a team that, we're not really going to go into the playoffs how they did, but this is a team that we thought would be able to make another run, but they didn't. I mean, Kucherov was spectacular as always. Braden Point was very good. Stamkos had a little bit of a disappointing season, but he's also the oldest of the 3. The problem with them is their young guys aren't necessarily stepping up because there's so many older guys that demand playing time at this point. Kucherov, definitely the future of this team, though. Braden Point, a great secondary guy. How do you feel about Tampa?
Yeah, Tampa, in my opinion, like you said, coming off of a 3rd consecutive Stanley Cup final that they lost last season, or in the 2022 season to the Avalanche. things definitely showed signs of breaking up, and I think over this next 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons, they're going to end up getting weaker and weaker slightly. The team obviously has some work to do, but I feel like they're in no rush front office-wise to do it. They still have plenty of faith in John Cooper. You know, Stamkos, Kucherov, all their core players are still with the team. So I think they're just kind of do what the Bruins are doing, in the fact that they're just going with it and seeing how far they can stretch it until they got to make some serious moves. Their goaltending is still decent. So this past season was just, you know, kind of just to say, we're not out of it, we're still here, and we're still chugging on, and we'll see how far we can go until, you know, one of the big names on the team has to get moved or something. So that goes to the last team, which is the Toronto in the Atlantic Division. Toronto Maple Leafs fans should be happier than last year. Put it that way. They won a playoff series for the first time since, what was the year? 2004 or something? Or 2000?
Yeah.
Something like that.
That sounds right.
Which is huge. But obviously they ended up losing in the second round. So the fans should be happy. They could be more impressed, but hopefully, you know, with that winning that series, that will give the team more energy going forward, because if you look, there's quite the similarity between the Toronto of the East and the Edmonton Oilers of the West. Excluding the fact that Edmonton can get further in the playoffs, both teams haven't won a cup in quite a while, and this is something that wants to change for both teams. On Toronto's end, they have plenty of players, and hopefully they'll make good moves in the offseason, but it's all there. You know, the presence is there in the forwards, Tavares and Matthews. You know, and the goaltending is decent, the defense is all right, and the coaching with Sheldon Keefe is pretty well. So honestly, there's not any huge thing I'd say they have to add at the end of this season. But their overall 2023 season was one that was definitely better in the last 2 seasons, and one that they can hopefully build upon going forward into the 2024 season. What about you?
You pretty much nailed it with that. I mean, they got their core 4 with Marner, Nylander, Matthews, and Tavares, but outside of that, they need more depth. That's the problem with how this team's constructed. You have 4 superstar players, you know, arguably 4 superstars. I wouldn't necessarily call Nylander one yet, but outside of those guys, it's kind of tough to think, to ask a casual hockey fan to name a player from the team that's not one of those 4. You're going to have some issues. I mean, they have some decent players, but no one's really spectacular. They did kind of help the goaltending, you're right. And there's definitely a bright future for this team. But defensively, they have been starting to work on it. But you were pretty good with saying Edmonton, because these are 2 teams that are high-driven offense with questionable defense. Now, last year, Toronto did a lot better defensively, but that's why they got past the first round of the playoffs. I just want to see them beat Boston in the playoffs, because that's the team that has been the thorn in their side for the past 100 years, it seems, in the postseason.
Yeah, definitely agreed, coming from a Boston fan. So we'll see what they do going forward, but not the worst season, but not the best. So that will conclude the Atlantic Division. I don't know how this video was longer than the last one, but that was the conclusion of episode 2 here, the Atlantic Division 2023 recap of NHL teams. We will move on to the next video, which will be the Central, so tune into that one in the next video. And comment, like, subscribe, follow us. There'll be more videos coming out other than just hockey and the free agency videos. You know, we'll get to baseball stuff, NASCAR stuff. So hopefully we'll get back into the pattern of more videos on a daily basis. So Eric, thanks for joining me in this video.
Thank you for having me.
And we will see you in the next video.